Hello, welcome back to Wealth and Women podcast, where we're all about taking accelerated action to achieve the progress that you need. Today, we are joined by the powerhouse that is Kim Uzzell. So Kim, a seasoned financial psychologist and money coach with over 30 years of experience in investment management. Kim specializes in reducing money-related stress, helping individuals break free from financial anxiety, and building long-term financial resilience. In this episode, we're diving into actionable money strategies and professional strategies because knowing isn't enough. Doing is what makes the difference. Kim, impressive CV, impressive journey. It takes you a long time to go through all the amazing achievements based on LinkedIn. But if you were to summarize your journey today, what would that look like?
I fell into finance. I started my career in law, which I also fell into. I didn't go to university. I just knew that I wanted to work in a law firm. And back in the 1980s, it wasn't the done thing. It wasn't the norm to become a lawyer without going to university. So I was already facing challenges. And I think that set me up to have a career full of challenges that as a woman who wanted to do something different, I needed to face. So I started in law, moved into stockbroking in the early 90s, happened to quite like it, despite the challenges, and stayed as a stockbroker for the best part of 30 years. And it wasn't always easy. Sometimes it was incredibly difficult, but it was a career that for many, many reasons I loved, and I was reluctant to leave. But in lockdown, things changed, and as the world changed, and I suddenly found, as I turned 50, that I wanted to have more of a voice for the financial topics that we don't cover in our client conversations, in our client meetings, and in our incredibly thorough training as financial professionals. And the only way that I felt that I could do that was to give up my regulated responsibilities, leave employment and start life on my own, and have a very different approach to this incredibly important topic. So 35 years in my career has taken me through so many different societal changes, so many technological changes when it comes to finance. But ultimately, there are still common threads that we haven't changed. And I almost feel that somebody's got to stand up and start shouting about these a little bit more. And I felt brave enough to do that. And I quite like rocking the boat a little bit. I quite like having the opportunity to tackle some of those issues and to raise awareness and to get people thinking about it in a different way. And so that's what brings me here.
That's so interesting. It always fascinates me when people pivot careers to set off as a lawyer and then pivot towards stockbroking. How did that happen? Like, what drove that choice?
I was in the right place at the right time. And I know that some people will say, there's no such thing as luck, you make your own luck. But I was in the right place at the right time. I started my career in trust administration. So these are the days before the internet, before everything was computerized. And part of my role was to take the advice that was being given to the trustees by the stockbrokers, to relay that advice to the trustees and to then give the instructions back to the stockbrokers and to register all the contract notes, to calculate all of the dividend schedules and the amount of tax due and the capital gains tax and the indexation back in the day that we had to deal with. And all of that was done manually. So it gave me a really good grounding in the way that investments work and the terminology and the paperwork. And there was a very small window in the early 1990s where it became the thing for law firms to have stockbrokers as part of their financial planning teams. And I was in the right place at the right time to be offered the chance to join that team in a dual capacity, doing the trust administration, but also working with the stockbroker who had been brought in. And I thoroughly enjoyed it, but it was very short-lived because the Law Society and the body who at the time was setting the stockbroking papers didn't see eye to eye. And so one set did not recognise the other set's qualifications, which meant that it was very difficult. If you got your qualifications with the Law Society investment papers, you couldn't then go and get a job easily outside. You'd have to resit those same exams again, and vice versa. You may have had 20 years experience as a stockbroker in a regulated firm somewhere else, but then the Law Society didn't think that was good enough. So, of course, that meant that there was very little movement and freedom of career movement, which back in the 90s was needed because we were going through some very difficult economic times and, jobs would come and go. So in that little window, I managed to get my exams. And then I found that the job didn't exist anymore. And I had to resit those exams and go and get a job in a proper stockbrokers. But I will be forever grateful for that window, because I wouldn't have had any other way in to that career. I wasn't from a typical stockbroker background. I didn't go to public school. My parents didn't have the connections that other people in that industry had. So, yes, I was really lucky. But also, I suppose, I took that opportunity. And instead of saying I'm okay with listing contract notes and calculating tax and acting as the go-between between the stockbroker and the trustees, I took that opportunity to take myself up a level. And from there, I didn't ever look back. So a great opportunity for a very short period of time until the Law Society and the financial services industry decided to part ways again. And then I obviously ran with the next chapter.
You say you didn't go to private school, and I think that's still quite uncommon in law now. So I imagine it would have been very uncommon in law then. So what forces, sort of external forces or influence, did you have around you that made you want to go into law?
I actually wanted to go into music. I played the viola quite badly, but I played the viola in the county youth orchestra, and all my friends, or a huge number of my friends, were also in that orchestra, and they were all going to sixth form to do a music course, and I wanted to do that same music course. And so when I was having a conversation with I would say my parents, but actually my dad wouldn't have minded. It was my mum that drove everything. And I said I wanted to do music. And she said, you'll never be good enough to make a living out of music. So, you can't go and do that course. And actually, at the time, I wasn't thinking about making a living out of anything. I was just thinking about 2 years with my friends doing the thing that we all enjoyed. But mums being mums, she turned around and said, you should go and do business studies. And the reason she gave me for, you should do business studies was not so you can become a lawyer or an accountant or an anything. It was so that you can get a nice little part-time job in the post office when you've had children. So I was never going to be good enough to do music, but apparently my life, after marriage, children, and returning to work was going to be working in a post office part-time. And that was the expectation. Again, this is the 80s. Things were very different. And I had to do what my mum said. And I did business studies. And while I was there, I really felt quite excited about law. Not trust law, I have to say. That wasn't the area I wanted to go into. But I was fascinated by it. But we couldn't afford to go to university. It was before student loans came in. And my parents were in that position. They weren't poor enough for me to get a grant, but they weren't, able to afford for me to go with them paying my fees. So I didn't go. And at the time in Norwich, there was a job at Norwich Union for every school leaver. Provided you had English O-level and Maths O-level, that was all you needed and you were guaranteed a job. So for a lot of people, it was their default. Oh, it's okay, I can always go and work at the union. It's, I don't need to work hard. There's a job for me at the union. There's a job with my name on. And for me, that was a bit of a failure. And I wanted to be ahead of the game. So I just started applying for jobs, any job that was loosely connected to law, not because I wanted the job, but because I wanted the interview experience. I wanted to get used to the questions. I wanted to get the fear away. And I went for interviews with law costs draftsmen. I went for interviews at the legal department in the council and all sorts of things just to get myself those skills. And I went for a job at Mills and Reeve. And I got the job and they offered me twice the salary that Norwich Union were going to pay. But I needed to start pretty much straight away. So I just took that chance and went back to college and said, I got myself a job, I'm leaving. So I didn't even finish my A-levels. But it was the chance that was too good to turn down. From there, I thought that I was going to move from trust administration, which was never my exciting sort of area of choice, into something that was going to be really, racy and sexy and a bit like Ally McBeal or, I suppose Suits would be the equivalent nowadays. And I really thought that I would be able to move into a more exciting area of law. I certainly didn't expect to move into stockbroking, which of course, just as exciting, but it was never on the radar. But literally it was because you've got to find a way where there's a challenge, you've got to find a way and you've got to think outside the box and you've got to somehow carve your path. And I did that just by applying for any job in law just to get the interview experience. And then out of the blue, one of them was offered to me when I least wanted it, really. But it was too good to turn down.
I love it. I think not once did I hear knowledge, but it's a lot of really growth mindset and giving this a go. I love what you said about moving away from the fear and more into a possibility mindset. And I think that sometimes it holds people back, certainly women. I think a lot of women, I don't know if your approach makes you an outlier. But I do recognize the resilience that most women develop over time. But early in the journey, it's very uncommon to find so much strength. So I don't know if it was your upbringing or a bit of a push from your mum who believed in you, in your potential.
No, I think she just believed that I wasn't going to be good enough to make a living as a musician, and she was right, but she was also very wrong about the fact that being in the post office would have been was going to be the right path for me. So she will still tell you, if she was here now, or if she's listening to this, she'll send me a message saying, see, I was right. And in many ways she was, but the reason behind her decision was still driven by that societal expectation that you would finish your education, get a job, meet somebody, marry them, have children, and then life would never be the same again. Yeah. Not go and do this because you've got so much more opportunity out there. And I think that's very telling of the times. Mm. And I think that has changed to a certain extent. And I look at my daughter who's just got a new daughter of her own. And I think the possibilities for them are huge. But they've still got to take those opportunities. We mustn't think, I can't.
Mm. Can I ask a question? Mm. So obviously you got into work. How quickly did you realise that you wanted to continue working and parenthood full-time and a part-time in the post office wasn't for you? And then also, can you talk a little bit about parenthood as it was for you working in finance?
So there were no role models at the time, really. By this point, it's the early to mid-90s. And we'd gone through a huge amount of change. We'd had some really strong role models. Margaret Thatcher had been Prime Minister for many, many years, and whether people love her or loathe her, she was the first female sort of person of authority that we'd had for hundreds of years, since Boadicea or somebody. Well, maybe Queen Victoria, I don't know. But we didn't have that many strong female role models at all, and certainly in the industry, Nicola Horlick was the only person really that you could ever look at. And even further afield in things like retail, you had Anita Roddick from The Body Shop, but again, that was about it. We didn't have those influences that we have now. We didn't have the ability to take our lead from anybody else. We had to find our own way and either stick with it or never follow it, and then wish later on that we had. So I think what I'm trying to say here is that there was no guidance. You just had to do what you felt was right for you at the time. And when I had my daughter, I was 23, so I was still quite young, and I knew that I needed to do something. I knew that I needed to work, because I found myself thinking about baby sick and nappies and thinking there's got to be more to my vocabulary than this. And I was very quick to go back to work after having her, which was not usual at the time. And then I very quickly fell pregnant with my son. There's only 15 months between them. And it was a given that I would keep working until basically I gave birth, and I would return back to work as soon as the stitches allowed me to do so. And whilst that does have challenges of its own, and it's not perfect by any means, and there are times when even now I'll still say I was a bit of a bad mother. Actually, I think the alternative would have been that I would have been an unhappy mother had I tried to be a stay-at-home mum.
You were doing what was right for you at the time.
Yeah.
And that doesn't make you a bad mother.
And I think that the lack of a role model there meant that I had nobody to challenge me or encourage me either way. So I had to make my own mind up. And then it came down to me. My mum was a nurse, so she had always worked. And my two grandmothers, even though they were of a different generation entirely, had always worked. My maternal grandmother was evacuated down to Norfolk in the war, and she was a teacher. And so she came to Norfolk with her class and settled in the countryside for safety. And she met and married my grandfather, who was a farmer. And most women of that time would have given up work and become a farmer's wife. She didn't. She went back to work as a teacher and became a head teacher of a local comprehensive school, so a challenging school in the 50s and 60s, which wasn't the norm. And so I think looking at my family, I had some great role models. And my paternal grandmother, she always worked. She'd got her degree when she was in her 60s. She was a Bletchley Park code breaker in the war, and she'd got this great drive as well. And I think I just inherited some of that and ran with it and made my own mistakes and made my own way. And it wasn't pretty at times. It really wasn't.
On that then, are you happy to share some of your best moments? And if you want to, some of the moments that were more challenging, if you'd like.
I think one of the best things that I did, as a result of trying to juggle all of these things, we used to have and it's also one of the things I am still reminded of from various people in our network. The children were latchkey kids, so they would come home from school, and the rule was that they would get off the bus, which literally only stopped about 3 doors away, walk in, lock the door behind them, and then they would ring me to tell me that they were home. And they weren't allowed to go outside until I got home. And And that was, again, not ideal. Remember, this is 30 odd years ago, so it is slightly different in terms of expectations. But at 4 o'clock every day, they would ring me in the office and I would have that mum and child argument. And you could hear it playing out. You know, she's looking at me, he won't let me do this. And my response would always be something along the lines of, well, no, I can't do anything about it here. I'm at work. Can't it wait until I get home? And everybody else in the office used to listen to this daily, and they can almost recite those phrases that I would come out with every day, imagining the children at the other end of the phone. So that was always a real challenge. And in terms of parenting, that felt pretty rubbish at times because I wasn't there for them. But what it did was it gave them a huge amount of independence. You know, my son knew that if he didn't sort himself something out for food, he was going to have to wait until I got home, and that might be a little bit too late for him. So he learnt to cook. He would, in the phone calls, he would say things like, "Okay, Mum, there's half a pepper, there's an onion, there's something that looks like a cucumber that's not a cucumber. Yeah, courgette, Paddy. I thought I'd make a pasta sauce because we've got some tin tomatoes. Is that okay?" And I would just say, yes, that's great, because I knew then that I didn't have to cook when I got home. And as a result, he became a chef. He's been a chef for the last 12 years. He's chefed in Europe. He's very happy being a chef. And he will, very quickly tell me that I didn't hold him back. I actually gave him the independence to make his own way. And from the outside, people might look in and think it's not great. There were times I very definitely thought internally it's not great, but do you know what? It worked. Would I do things differently? Of course I would, because times have changed. Can I regret it? I don't think I can. But some of my colleagues, my previous colleagues, will still say, yeah, the 4 o'clock call. There would be, eyes rolling as I did the whole, have you locked the door? No, you can't go out to play. Have you done your homework? No, I don't care what she said. Am I there? No, I'm not there. That whole one-sided conversation still very definitely rings in my head now.
I can sense a thread of pushing boundaries, taking risks, and being quite curious about the next level, like the uncharted territories, which I love. So do you think that set you up in a way to embrace financial coaching as a next step for you? What drove you to that? I know you said, I seized an opportunity, I was seeing a need for it, but what was your internal drive, as in, like, what set you off for that?
There's actually a sort of a really big event that happened in my career and in my life that switched me over into a different way of thinking. And that was that 20 years ago, I lost my dad very suddenly. And I had that moment of thinking that there's got to be more. I haven't ever taken my children to school. I haven't been there. You never know when life is up. You've got to do things differently. And I needed, on a personal level, I needed support. And 20 years ago, we didn't have that support. It was really difficult to get bereavement counselling or anything. And so I started to look for the answers myself. So I think a lot of coaches end up doing things because they're trying to solve their own problems. And we realise that there's more to this. But at the same time, literally, the same week or two, we lost a client at work who was concerned that she didn't have enough money to put her boys through university. And the numbers spoke for themselves. She absolutely did. And she was told that and, went on her way. And a few days later, we discovered that she had taken her own life. And I'm not saying that it was all about the money, because mental health is an incredibly complex and still very misunderstood area. But it certainly could have been a contributor. And as an industry, we didn't know how to deal with that. We could see the numbers. We could see that everything was okay. We could answer her questions in that way that we were taught and we knew and we were examined on. And we'd done that really, really well. But it wasn't what she needed. And those two things happening at the same time really set me off on this very different path and approach, that there were things we needed to talk about. There were things we needed to understand. There were questions that remained unasked and certainly remained unanswered. And how did we get to that point, and how do we move on from that? So part of it was my own healing journey, trying to answer my own what is life all about questions. And part of it was because I had started to see that it doesn't matter how much money you've got. It doesn't matter what your background is. It doesn't matter how good the advice is that you get. There's a lot of other stuff there. And that stuff, even 20 years later, is still not being dealt with. It's not being spoken about. We're starting to make those changes, but we're not getting there very quickly. And we need to ramp that up a little bit, because otherwise what we're doing is simply passing our expectations that you don't talk about these things, or that if somebody says it's enough, it's enough. Don't question it. We're just passing that down to the next generation, whether that's a generation that has nothing, a generation that has opportunity, or a generation that is born with a huge amount of privilege. So that was the time that I took my first coaching qualifications and really started to explore things alongside my career and try and introduce some of those conversations into the office, into the client meetings. Not always successfully, not always confidently, but of course the older I got, the more it became important to me, and the more I think we all get a little bit braver with age. And I stopped worrying so much about what people might think if I said some of these things, and I started to simply say them. And that felt quite liberating, talking about things like the gender pension gap. What are you going to do about it? What are we, don't expect somebody else to sort it out. We've got to take that action ourselves. We've got to do something. Nobody owes you a living. You've got the ability to complain about something. You've also got the ability to do something about it. But if you don't know what it is that you need to do, then how are you ever going to make that change? So yeah, it was out of two really quite tragic events, and that getting older and braver, that I took the decision to spend all my time, on that conversation piece, really.
What do you think makes you a great coach?
It's certainly not my listening skills, because I talk too much through coaching sessions. I'm much more of a mentor, I think. I want to talk about and encourage the conversation, because I think although when we are coaching, the ideal scenario is that you sit back and listen and let the client come up with all the answers themselves. But if the answers that they're holding internally are the ones that they got from their mothers and their grandmothers and society, then they may not be the answers that they need. And it may actually hold them back and keep them stuck. So my approach is quite different, I think. And it's coming up with that combination of practicality, but with that real understanding that there is more behind this than you might be letting on, or you might be thinking, don't just give me the answers that you think I want to hear, because I need to work with the real issue. But you've got to tell me what that real issue is. You've got to be honest and open and forget what everybody else has told you. Yeah. just come out with it. And I think once that starts to happen, real magic can happen and real changes can be made, but everybody has to open that conversation.
Yeah, I like that.
Me too. And you talk about real changes can be made in the context of coaching. I know you're incredibly passionate about change in the financial services profession, industry as a whole. Talk through some of the things you're really passionate about, if you don't mind, with a specific focus, I guess, as we're here with the Accelerate Action mantra, as to what you're passionate about that you think should change and what actions you think would benefit women.
So we're still, women of all ages, particularly women of sort of 30 plus, are still very much of the generation where it was expected that there would be gaps. We didn't have auto-enrollment in pension schemes, for example. So my daughter, at the age of 30, she's in a career, her pension gets contributed to whether she likes it or not, basically. So it may not be fabulous, but it's something. Whereas when I had my children, the pension scheme was there at work, but I didn't have to pay into it. And actually at that time, I was paying for childcare or I was paying for nappies or whatever. And it was always something that I would do later. So I think, we've got so many women who have either grown up with the expectation that it is pin money, like my mum's saying about getting a part-time job in the post office, that would have been as a little extra, little bit of pocket money, or that a partner, generally male, would provide, including your retirement. It would be their pension that carried both of you through. And when we did have those career opportunities, we didn't generally have really good benefits when it came to maternity leave. I certainly didn't get a year's maternity when I had my two. Even if I wanted it wasn't available. Childcare support wasn't there. And so we've got lots of gaps that moving forward are being filled, but there's no back pay. There's no back pay for gender pay gaps. There's no back pay for pension contributions. And that means that we can either sit there and say, oh, poor me, it's so unfair. I'm never going to be able to travel or leave my toxic relationship or whatever. Mm-hmm. Or we can say, I'm just going to do something about it. And that's what I really want to encourage the industry to encourage and for women to do. Just make a start. And the world is not going to fill in those gaps for you. You could be waiting a very long time, and in the meantime, you might feel unhappy, unsafe, just not fulfilled in some way. So what can you do about it? And we can all do something. And it might only be putting away a few pounds a month. It might only be rediverting some of your spending money to a savings or an investment account, but just do something. Otherwise, those gaps are only going to get bigger and they're going to move to the next generation. But nobody's going to do it for you.
So true. And I think the work that you do, and I think across the board in financial planning, we try, I'm a financial coach as well. So I find that I spend a lot of my time in the educational space, educating people. And it's not just about helping people understand how pension works. It's about equipping them with the language to get access to those best ideas, to express those best ideas, because they all have drives, they all have their own motivations, but how they are connected to financial well-being, that's a different thing. And to your point, because we don't talk about this, we can't articulate it well enough. And because we can't articulate it well enough, we can't ask meaningful questions. Mm-hmm. And as you probably know, the better the questions, the better the answers, and the better the actions and the progress. So all being interconnected, I think you're right. I think people refer to coaching as coaching, but also ultimately to get the best out of that client's potential, you need to educate them and partner. It's not you telling them what to do. It's not you expecting the world from them. It's a growth process, isn't it?
It is. One of the things I remember from the days in the law was that you certainly weren't expected to remember every element of case law, but you were expected to know where to look for it. So that stayed with me. You're not expected to know everything. And I certainly, I don't consider myself to be a massive knowledge bank. But you need to know that you can ask the question and go and find the answer from somewhere else. And that's something that we don't do around money. You don't ask the question, you don't talk about it. So how can you know where to go and look for it? So people are taking their advice, unfortunately, from YouTube. They're taking it from social media, or they're taking it from their mate down the pub. They're not getting the real good advice because they don't actually know what good advice looks like. So we have to support them in a very holistic way. So it's the management of their money, it's the mindset around it, it's the dealing with the nervous system responses, it's the opening the conversation in the first place, and remembering that every conversation we have involves at least two people. And if we can empower somebody to have a better conversation with somebody else, that's the ripple effect in motion. And it doesn't take very long. If you have a group of people who are suddenly chatting about money and savings and the different apps on their phone and hints and tips, and I've tried this and I've done that, and that sort of conversation can then really escalate, beyond all expectations and help many, many people to get a little bit more comfortable. We'll talk about anything other than our money. We'll go to the doctor about all sorts of weird and wonderful things nowadays, but we still won't talk to our partner about the fact that we're worried that the electricity bill's gone up, or that we've been a bit silly on our credit card and now we've got to pay the consequences. We hide away from those things because we're still conditioned to don't talk about it.
Yeah, it's a lot of reactive approach, doesn't it? Isn't it? And I find that a lot of my clients say around the dinner table is where they put the world to right, and it usually is not about let's think about the world in a constructive way. It's about what has got to happen, or what gaps to be filled, what sort of crisis we have to manage, because the time we spend is so scarce, isn't it? So I'm not surprised that people don't practice this constructive. They don't have money dates, do they, to where they can sit down and look through their things?
But also, people are afraid to even open their banking up on their phone. It's like, you've earned that money. You've worked really hard for that money. You should be keeping an eye on it. If you were to drop a £5 note in the street, you would stop and pick it up, or you'd be really grateful for the fact that somebody else behind you picked it up and then ran after you to give it back to you. You wouldn't just let it go. But we do that with our finances all the time. We don't look at our bank accounts. We don't know where our money's going. We don't know how much our mortgage is. We don't know what our utility bills are, because we are not even looking at the things that are closest to us. And if we can't look at that, then how can we build on that?
Yeah, I find that it's a lot of like an intuitive rather than a structured approach, and that puts people in a reactive stance. Also, I find that, I don't know about you, but I find that a lot of people have this pre-made judgment that they're going to be, it's like a maths exercise where you fail when you present yourself in front of a professional. So they walk into coaching conversations with a lot of fear and scarcity thinking she's going to judge me. I'm going to fail this test for sure. I'm not in line. And also, they see a straight haircut and they assume it's a straight, very square person. I did smile when I saw your LinkedIn profile where you talk about your love for gin and your passion for skiing and your dancing around the kitchen, because these things makes us all human, really good conversational partners. I mean, listening to your story is so inspirational, and it grounds you and it makes it real. But people don't see financial professionals like that. They assume you're like the perfect person, really professional, who is going to test you from A to Z in terms of where your finances are at, and is going to be, again, a reactive conversation that you're going to dread. And how many times your clients have left a little bit more relieved that actually it wasn't as bad as they thought?
Talking to a human, goodness gracious, but we have to be able to show that. We mustn't, as professionals, we mustn't be afraid to show our human side, because we learn through life. Some of our knowledge, some of our advice-giving capabilities comes from the textbooks, comes from learning those, hugely horrific algebraic equations and poring over our books for, hours and hours and hours on end. Some of it, though, comes from real life, just as a lot of my financial awareness comes from my own mistakes, losing my dad so suddenly, and then seeing what that client was going through. And they're all human things. They're nothing to do with textbooks. There's no manual written on a lot of these things. So, we can wing it in other areas of life, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, whether it's making a cake or having a relationship or bringing up children. So why can't we accept that actually we learn about our finances as we go through life? And that means we can have a better conversation, because it's not just do as I say, or do what the chart tells you, or do what the algorithm is coming up with. It's do what feels right. Do what you need. Do what you want. But let's talk about it so that you really do get what you need, not what somebody else needs, what you want, not what somebody else wants. And you do it in a way that is in line with your values and your priorities and the things that make you smile. And if that's a life full of kitchen dancing and, gin tasting and skiing, then you don't want to be setting up all of your wealth strategies for a life that is centered around, three completely different things.
Absolutely. And, I love the fact that you looked, like from your stories, you grasped the right opportunity to learn from your setbacks and other people's setbacks. Because in your mind was, okay, well, this is definitely something I don't want. But what do I want instead? And I think that's where, for a lot of people, that's a blocking moment where they anchor their planning into fear. And usually fear-based planning doesn't go far, does it? So you need that to find that alternative. Like, okay, I definitely don't want this. I fear that I may be able to fail as a parent or as a partner or as a professional. What else is available to me? Where do I take the control? And I think that's a lot of the stories where, from a financial point of view, a lot of our clients feel like they haven't achieved as much, is when they basically hit the emergency brake and they stopped in their tracks and they got too scared to try to take risks, to talk to somebody, to get out of the woods in that sense.
And that's why paying attention to the way that we feel around these things and paying attention to our nervous system. We were having a conversation before we came into this room about the things that you feel before you've even had time to think about them. Those gut feelings, the exuberance, the gut-wrenching things that happen that you don't feel you have any control over. But they're happening for a reason, and it's our bodies that are giving us those feelings. And if we can better understand what that's all about and why we're feeling that way, then we can start to work with our bodies and come up with alternatives that suit us. And so it is a holistic thing. It is a 360-degree approach to finance, because you can have the best wealth management capabilities, but if you have an emotional sort of set of responses that is full of fear, full of judgment, full of I've got to do it to keep somebody else happy, then it doesn't matter how much wealth you've got, how good your wealth capabilities are. you're going to be lacking somewhere else in life. And the same the other way around. You might be happy-go-lucky and being one of those people that everybody else looks at and thinks that they've got it all together. But actually, you're running scared of the fact that, you've not got any money put away for your future, or you can't help your children out because there's nothing left, or you can't pay for your care in your old age. So we really do need to look at both sides, the very practical side, but we also need to dig much deeper into our feelings around money, our emotions around it, what got us to this point. The societal expectations of the past, the generational expectations, the cultural expectations, they all play a part, and they all need to be respected. And some of them you might look back and say, well, we do things differently now. Yes, we might do, but you're still holding on to some of those. And until we include those in our conversations respectfully and curiously, then I think we're going to remain stuck. And that's not what anybody wants. We've got a future ahead of us.
What I think I'm picking up a lot from this conversation, as well as what Alina's already said, that you have learned from the challenges in your life, it's the fact that, and I think what sets you apart is that you haven't just learned from it and kept that learning to yourself, but you've learned from it and then felt comfortable, or maybe not comfortable, but willing to be vulnerable, to use that to help others. And I think that's something that's lacking in my experience in financial services, because there is a lot of keeping up with the Joneses and portraying a version of yourself that isn't necessarily who you are inside. So just very quickly, talk to me about, how that feels and why you do that, and I guess your values.
I do it because I felt throughout the majority of my career that I was living a Jekyll and Hyde lifestyle. I would be very well qualified. I would be able to give the advice to the clients. I would be, the person I was expected to be in the office. And then in my personal life, I would be I had a very toxic relationship with money. I was trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed. I was trying to fix an unhappy marriage by spending more money. I was trying to do all of those things that just led me into this huge spiral of credit card debt that I then had to keep on top of, because I couldn't go into work and say, I've overspent, I've got a bit of a problem. And I ran this dual lifestyle for a long time with a massive amount of fear. And I thought it was just me. It was only within the last few years that I recognised that there are a lot of people in the industry who have those same dual aspects going on. And it's the same within other professions as well. We do brilliant jobs for other people because that's our logic and our knowledge part of our brain. But behind closed doors, or as soon as we leave the office, it's almost like we've put a different hat on and we've become that sort of scatterbrained or spendy happy or people pleasing or whatever it might be person. And the two don't line up, but you can only talk about one. People are only interested in one, but actually there's a huge number of people in the profession who are the other as well. And I felt that needed to be spoken about, because again, it's one of those things, if we keep hiding it under the carpet, it's going to stay under the carpet and the problem just gets bigger. Mm-hmm. If we start to open up that conversation, it is uncomfortable. I don't like admitting some of the stupid... I bought a boat and I learnt to fly and all of these things. I couldn't even afford to feed my children properly, and I was spending money on stupid things trying to impress other people or, fix an unhappy marriage. And yet, when you do start having those conversations, you can visibly see people in the room going, oh, gosh, it's not just me. Yeah. I thought it was just me, and now I know that it's not, and maybe I'm not ready to go public with it just yet, but I might go home and breathe a little bit easier. And I think sometimes we have to do that in order to stop somebody else feeling the pain and the stress that either we've been through ourselves or we've seen other people close to us go through.
I mean, that's really inspiring because you'll be the catalyst for other people to feel comfortable talking to their relatives or their friends, and the ripple effect I think we were talking about in a previous episode, the ripple effect of you having the confidence, or whatever, the courage is probably the better word, the courage to share things that are not comfortable, will be incredible for lots of people.
Yeah, and I think you touched upon one area where I feel like I really, because I work with financial services people as well, and I think the worst thing is when you know better than you do. Your actions don't really reflect your level of knowledge. So I have people working in a room that know the A to Z when it comes to pensions, savings, investments, but they don't do it. Yes. So I think the secret there is to, the magic of what you do is helping people have the right mindset so they can focus on the using the knowledge, embedding that in some processes that also mean creating some really positive habits. Because ultimately, how many times do you find that you have a client in front of you, they ask you a money-focused question, and you continue for the rest of the hour or whatever, however long you talk to them, talking about their lifestyle, their well-being, the areas where they get the most reward from, the kids, the family, the jobs, the travel, and that's ultimately, I find that, often money is an outlet for people to plug gaps in areas, just like you said.
Money overlaps into all of those other areas of life. If you have a wheel of life, and you'll have all of the different segments with, physical health, mental health, relationships, finances, career development, every one of those will have an impact or be impacted by finances. So you might have a great social life, but you're spending so much on that social life that you have no money in the bank. Mm-hmm. Or you may be focusing so hard on your career, which gives you great career development and a great big salary, but your relationship is almost at an end because you're not spending time with the people that you love the most. Or your health, your physical health may be coming close to the wire because you're facing burnout, because you are working harder and harder to bring in the money. So wherever we look on a typical coaching wheel of life, finances are often the thing that impacts each and every one of those segments more than anything else. And if we ignore the money, or if we're afraid to talk about the money, then we can't expect those other areas to improve. We can't expect our relationships to improve if we're going to be arguing about money, or if we're hiding a secret credit card and we're worried that it's going to come out at some point. We can't have a healthy social life if we can't sustain it, or if we can't have that career development that we so want if it's going to give us a heart attack at the age of 43. So money is the common denominator, but it's not the one that's being spoken about more. So regardless of what sort of coaching people are in, we need to open that financial conversation more, because it impacts every other part, parenting, everything.
It baffles me, and it baffled for a long time how things are approached so in such a cluster kind of way. So, but I celebrate the fact that there are some real improvements in the way mental health has been approached over the years, and now financial well-being is approached. I think, but still, currently, mental health and financial health are being approached separately, and I think, as a next level, I can see that opportunity to bring them both together, because they are so interconnected.
They need to be brought together, because we've got a huge amount of the top half of that cycle being dealt with, and an organisation's bringing in a huge array of well-being and mindfulness programmes at great expense to them. And it's great in the moment, but it doesn't matter how much yoga or colouring in or team building on a obstacle course you do, if those employees are still going home and stressing about how they're going to pay their credit card bill this month, or they've still got to have that conversation with their partner because they haven't got the money that they need for the holiday that they've promised the kids, then that stress is going to come straight back again. Mm-hmm. So they're only doing half the job, and they're still failing to see that dealing with that financial well-being as well doesn't replace the the other stuff. It enhances it. And when we can get that message across, and again, that very holistic, that 360-degree approach, it's going to impact so many other areas of their employees' lives, the business bottom line, the work culture. Everything feels a whole lot different. So the streets are heading one way, and they're still very much in the dark ages, as we all are with these financial conversations in other ways. So we need to keep chipping away.
Wow, a whole topic for a whole podcast. I feel like we're really close to time, aren't we?
I think so.
Hazel.
Yeah. So I guess one more question is, where now for you? What's next?
I will continue to have those difficult conversations, to bring those out, and hopefully to encourage people to just think slightly differently, to stop beating themselves up, to take some sort of action that is going to make a real difference to them, so that they don't just go round and round and round in circles and then pass that on to the next generation as well, whether that's themselves and their families or themselves and their clients. I think we need to have those different conversations, and it's not getting through yet. So I need to bang the drum a little bit longer and a little bit louder yet. And I quite like doing that. Now that I've found my voice, now that I've stopped hiding away from it, it's almost like just make the most of the opportunities, because you never know who might take something away from it and actually go and make a difference.
So a strong, compelling voice with a big message and a wealth of experience, and lots of insights to be shared. I was wondering if, before we let you go, if you have 3 tips, what would accelerate growth for anybody?
Think outside the box. I wouldn't have got my job in the law firm if I hadn't sat down with the Yellow Pages and just applied for any, written to every law firm and said, have you got anything? So don't be afraid to do things that are not normal or not expected. Take your chances. What's the worst that's going to happen? You'll get another opportunity somewhere else. And the most important thing is just do something. It's never too early to start. It's never too late to start. So don't say, well, I haven't got a pension fund. No point in starting now. Do something. Anything is better than nothing. And you will have more if you do something than if you sit there and complain about it.
Wise, very wise.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kim. I'm sure everyone who's listened will have a lot to take away from the candid conversation we've had today. Thanks to you for joining us for today's episode of Wealth and Women. You can follow us on the PFS podcast page on Spotify, and also follow the Personal Finance Society on LinkedIn, or connect with anyone who you've met on this series. If you'd like to catch up, you can see previous episodes there. And when we put out details for this episode, please share your thoughts, your views. We'd like to hear any views. So whatever you'd like to say, we'd be interested in hearing and responding to. Thank you.